invent because it's probably a habit or laziness, if you wish. Habit is because my family, I got it from my parents. My mom and dad, they were scientists back in Soviet Union, and I kind of saw them doing things, and I was talking to them, and my first patent, which was not really called a patent, it was something Soviet Union, something else. It was when I was 16 years old. So I had 2 patents when I was 16 years old that were actually filed with me as a participant. And then I started working in different organizations where I had to kind of push it forward. I had my own business where I had to invent things. And then after that, I moved to the North America. I worked mainly for research and forward-looking organizations. So I had to invent, and it became a habit. But the real reason is that when I do things, I feel sometimes that the way how things are not really effective. They're not really. It could be simpler, it could be easier, it could be faster to do things, and that's what I call laziness. This kind of productive laziness in my mind is that makes you try to find easier ways of doing the same stuff that you've done before. And it's either you look for architectures, or you look for practices that you do, or you look for even the way how you think about the whole problem. So this is pretty much why I do that, I think. Like with everything, it's certain percent of inspiration and a lot of perspiration, so to say. It's a lot of stuff that you have to do just because, if you said A, you have to say B. If you invent something, you have to actually do all the routine stuff that is associated with it. You have to write up papers or patents, you have to formalize things, you have to do research around it. And that creates kind of a secondary wave of innovation, because you might come up with one thing, and it seems to you as one thing when you actually invented it, but when you start putting it apart, you kind of see, oh, there is a novelty here, there is novelty there, and then you kind of break it up into components to make it simpler and simpler again. So now when you have those components together, it's really crisp and obvious. It's not a mishmash of new ideas. It's actually one new idea at a time in one particular place. And this is what makes, this is where perspiration comes in, because it's not really easy sometimes to get a vague idea and structure it in a way that actually is very crisp and simple. And it's kind of maybe several different new ideas together. So there are many different reasons and different modes of it. So different inventions, and just to get into perspective, I stopped counting my granted inventions after about 20, and I don't even count how many I have in the pipeline. I would think between 60 and 70 in the pipeline right now. So it is not the same, the same way for every one of them, right? Some of them were created purposely. Some of them were created because, it was a, lucky coincidence. And some of them were created as a result of what people think, this nagging thought that sits with you for years and doesn't let you off the hook, because you don't really know the answer to it, but you feel you have it somewhere. And then when you really get to the gist of it, this is where the invention happens. This is where really interesting things happen, because all of a sudden it kind of snaps together into one picture. That can happen anywhere. Like I remember sitting in a concert and I was so bored out of my mind in that concert because the music was not very good. So I kind of drifted away, and I found the answer to the question that bothered me for maybe several years. So it's not really one, but I think it's more than that. More than anything, it's a mindset. Like you really train yourself to look at things in a certain way, and if a thought comes to you, many people have there's an attitude to the thing. Some people would latch on a new idea and just kind of milk it all the way to the end, and some people would just discount it, right? To strike the balance between what you think is novel and useful and what is really obsession with an idea. This is where you really have to train yourself, because you have to be skeptic also. Some ideas come to your mind, they might be utterly useless, or they can be useful to something else, and you have to decide what do you do really about it. So there are clearly situations when we invent in the brainstorming session. It's not invention by myself. It's not the only inventor. Sometimes we get in the room with the purpose of actually sitting together and talking about stuff. So the way how it works very nicely, we figured out a way, almost like a recipe, that produces quite a bit of those inventions. So we get together with my colleagues in CA Labs. And just one thing I didn't mention, I work for CA Labs, which is a researchy arm of CA, a forward-looking part of Office of CTO, and our goal is to look, so we have Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, right, is the way how we structure our thinking about the business. So CA Labs is really looking at Horizon 2 and Horizon 3, but when we talk about Horizon 3 from a business perspective, it's maybe 5 years ahead. It means that you will be starting developing things maybe 3 years ahead, and those ideas that you will start working 3 years ahead, my job is to make intellectual property relevant to that. So I have to start today working on something that somebody else will be working 3 years from now, but I have to have university and students and research arranged that they actually do the PhD work or master's thesis work or whatever they do. Sometimes it's postdocs that work in this. They have to come up with the results. So I have to be like 6 years, 7 years ahead, really, when thinking about the stuff that we're going to be doing 3 years ahead, because I have to have results of that research already done 3 years down the up the road. And this is where the necessity for invention comes along. Like, we get together in the room, and we get our patent lawyers involved. So they sit in the room and they act as facilitators or scribes, so to say, and we just, thinking about those things that have to come down the road. Sometime in the future, we take a topic and we kind of bounce it around among ourselves and discuss those things in a way that we try to be creative and forward thinking about it. So the patent lawyer sitting in the room listening to that, actually saying, you know what, I think that is something that you can actually, something patentable. So let's go in there. And then we can elaborate on that part, and he would write it down. We will take our notes. And in the sessions like that, we might have, 5, 6, I think once we had 10 ideas coming out of one session as a group. It doesn't mean that everyone in the group invents the same thing. It's, different people come up with different things. This is where it's difficult to split up at some point, but it becomes crisp, who came up with what idea, when you go through the details. But so there are different things, different environments. So this one. Another one which works when I'm a solo inventor, it's more like I described earlier, that in a concert, I am bored. I have nothing really else to do. Or I really like do it, on a long trip, let's say on a plane, things like that. When you don't really have much going on, so you can think about in a relaxed way about stuff. This is when ideas come up. Another situation is really weird, maybe. In the morning when you wake up, sometimes you're not completely woken up. You're kind of in between the dreaming and awake state. This is when, interesting stuff also happens, right? Because you kind of wake up. For that, you really have to have that stuff real in the back of your mind all the time. And then you kind of remember a problem. And you lay down there before you actually walk, and you kind of think about it. And all kinds of things come together for some reason at some point. And then the important thing is to remember when you completely wake up. So there are different ways of doing it. But I think more than anything, it's a habit and constant immersion in the problem. So you cannot really be, in my mind, you cannot really be a part-time inventor. You cannot be somebody who just completely work in this mode saying, I'm going to sit in the room and I will think for 1 hour and I will come up with something else. It doesn't work this way because you need raw material. You have to be getting in all kinds of information. You have to be reading a lot of stuff. Like some of the things I do that might people use and really put to practice. I review all training courses. So I go, for example, let's say I know math and analytics pretty well and stuff that is associated with it. But I will go and take a refresher course, and a lot of the stuff you would know, but certain things, like sometimes you read a book and you find things that you've never seen in that book, although you read that book several times. This is the same stuff with reviewing all courses, like scientific or training courses. It gives you kind of that impetus. So you have to be submersed. You have to be really engaged, and you have to be thinking about this more than just 8 hours at work. It becomes part of your life. I think that's the answer. I think I'm staying one step ahead of the game. I think I already did that. You can like being an inventor if it's a pleasant experience. Very often it's not pleasant. When it becomes non-pleasant, it's when you invent something and it's completely obvious to you, but you get rejected. Being an inventor, you have to be ready for rejection, and you have to be ready for repeating and explaining your idea over and over and over and over again until it sinks. Because the fact that it's actually snapped for you and you figured it out, it doesn't mean it's easy for others to actually get to the same moment. You have to prepare. And that is where perspiration also comes in. You have to really do it. So it is really enjoyable in a moment when you come up with the answer and you think you're on the top of the world, but then you quickly come down to really nitty-gritty and hard work, which is not really fun sometimes, right? It's a combination of hard work and excitement, and but by the end of the day, it's really rewarding because when you start seeing things in a slightly different way, not as everybody else does, when it becomes your kind of outlook on life, you start seeing things, that others see in a slightly different light, which actually gives you become, in my mind, you become a bit more alive. You become much more engaged in life and a bit more interested in it. And this is, I think, what the side effect of inventing is. You're becoming more engaged in what is going on. And that is becoming something that is rewarding in itself.